A bell over water is supposed to mean safety. It tells ships where the harbor is, warns people away from rocks, and turns fog into something a town can measure. But some lake stories begin after the warning fails: a sound in the dark, an empty boat, a shoreline full of witnesses, and water that gives no useful answer. This episode is not about proving that lakes are haunted. It is about the older, stranger pattern behind those stories: real places where people vanished, real disasters that sounded impossible at first, and legends that grew because the water kept the evidence out of reach. The first case begins on November 20, 1980, at Lake Peigneur in Louisiana. Workers were drilling near Jefferson Island, above a salt mine that had been cut beneath the lake. The lake did not just flood. It turned into a whirlpool large enough to pull in barges, trees, land, and an oil platform. The myth version says the lake simply disappeared. The fact version is more technical and more terrifying. A drilling operation pierced or connected with the mine workings below. Fresh water rushed downward, salt dissolved, the hole widened, and the lake began draining into the earth like a bathtub with the bottom torn open. Men in the mine escaped. The drilling crew escaped. A fisherman got his small boat to shore. That is part of why the case feels unreal. The scene looked apocalyptic, but the human death toll was avoided by fast warnings, luck, and evacuation. The lake swallowed machinery instead of a village. Then the geography changed. Water from the Delcombe Canal flowed backward into the lake. The formerly shallow freshwater lake became deeper and saltier. Days later, some sunken barges rose back to the surface after pressure equalized. It sounds like folklore, but the core event is documented industrial disaster. The second case is darker because the lake looked calm before it killed. On August 21, 1986, Lake Nyos in northwestern Cameroon released a massive cloud of carbon dioxide. The gas moved down into surrounding valleys and villages, displacing breathable air. More than 1,700 people died, along with thousands of livestock. Survivors described silence, collapse, and entire households gone overnight. The old myth shape would call it a cursed lake. The fact is colder, volcanic carbon dioxide had accumulated in deep water until a sudden release turned the landscape itself into a trap. Lake Nyos matters because it shows how a true explanation can feel more supernatural than the rumor. There was no visible monster and no attacker. There was a crater lake, deep gas, pressure, density, and a cloud people could not fight because they could not see the danger in time. Scientists later installed degassing systems to reduce the risk of another sudden release. That is the clean myth vs fact line. The lake was not punished by spirits. It was physically dangerous in a way local memory, scientific investigation, and engineering all had to learn to name. The third case brings us to Lake Superior on November 10, 1975. The freighter Edmund Fitzgerald was carrying iron ore through a severe storm when it sank with all 29 crew members. No distress signal explained the final minutes. The ship went down in water so large and cold that the lake felt like an inland sea. Here the bell is literal. In 1995, divers recovered the ship's bronze bell from the wreck site and replaced it with a replica engraved with the names of the lost crew. The recovered bell became a memorial object, not proof of a ghost story, but proof that a disaster can leave one sound behind. The myth version of shipwrecks often imagines voices under the waves, bells heard through fog, or lights that should not be there. The fact version is already strong enough: a 729-foot freighter, gale conditions, 29 dead, no final radio call that solved the mystery, and a bell raised from 530 feet of water 20 years later. This is why lake legends are hard to kill. Water edits the record. It moves wreckage, hides bodies, distorts sound, and makes distance difficult to judge. A road accident leaves skid marks. A house fire leaves walls. A lake can leave only a missing boat and a family waiting at shore. In many towns, warning bells and harbor lights became memory machines. They did practical work, but they also gave people a way to talk about fear. If a bell rang, someone could say the danger had announced itself. If no bell rang, the silence became part of the story. That is where empty boat legends enter. A boat returns without the person who launched it. Oars drift in. A hat, a lantern, a fishing line, or a wet coat survives when the person does not. These details appear again and again because they are psychologically precise. They turn absence into an object people can hold. But careful storytelling has to separate patterns from proof. A returned boat does not prove a supernatural force. A reported bell does not prove a spirit. A lake disaster does not become folklore because people were naive. It becomes folklore because the documented facts leave emotional gaps that official reports cannot close. The Lake Peigneur case leaves a visual gap. How can a lake swallow barges and then spit some back up? The Lake Nyos case leaves a sensory gap. How can a village die without a visible attacker? The Edmund Fitzgerald leaves a final minute gap. What exactly happened between routine radio contact and silence? Those gaps are where myth moves in. Myth says the lake wanted something. Fact says the lake, the weather, the geology, the mine, the gas, or the storm created conditions people did not fully control. Midnight Vault lives in the space where those two explanations compete. There is also a practical reason these stories survive. Lakes often sit beside towns that depend on them. They provide work, transport, food, power, and beauty. A dangerous lake is not a distant monster. It is the place people return to the next morning because life still requires it. So communities build rituals. Bells ring for crews. Memorials list names. Museums keep recovered objects. Scientists monitor gas. Engineers install pipes. Families repeat the warning stories. These are not all the same kind of truth, but they all answer the same human need: do not let the water take the event twice. The strongest lake mysteries are not the ones with the wildest claims. They are the ones where the fact pattern is already sharp: a date, a place, witnesses, physical evidence, and one missing piece that refuses to become simple. That is why the empty boat remains such a powerful image. It is not a monster. It is a question. It says someone was here, something changed, and the lake kept the last page. The clean ending is this. Fact: Lake Peigneur was transformed by an industrial drilling and salt mine disaster in 1980. Fact: Lake Nyos released carbon dioxide in 1986 and killed more than 1,700 people. Fact: The Edmund Fitzgerald sank in Lake Superior in 1975, and its bell was recovered in 1995 as a memorial. Myth: That every bell on water is an omen, every vanished boat is paranormal, and every unexplained lake death needs a supernatural cause. The real story is stricter and more unsettling. Water does not have to be haunted to behave like a locked room. A lake can hide a mine, hold invisible gas, raise a storm, preserve a bell, erase a person, and leave behind just enough evidence for people to argue for generations. That is not a legend replacing fact. That is fact becoming the seed of legend.